This is the oral history of George Tobolowsky taken by May Siebel for the Dallas Jewish Historical Society on March 20th, 2018. Hi George, thank you for having us in your lovely home.
You're welcome.
We'd like to go back as far as we can. What do you know about your family's early history?
Well, I can remember my grandfather, of course my father, and a little bit from my mother's side. They both grandparents were in the milliner business. They were both making hats. They made cowboy hats and women's hats, but on different parts of the country, and then they ended up both in Dallas. My mother was a registered nurse and an artist, and met my father during wartime because one important thing during wartime was that she could get gasoline as a registered nurse and public health nurse. So they had gasoline to go on dates. So his father, Jack Tobolowsky's father, Ruth Tobolowsky, the story I remember, they left Poland in about 1880s. I believe he was born in Sweden, across the way. They were there a few years and then came to the States. That side of the family. It must have been pretty rough times back there. I think Rude came to America when he was 2 or 3 years old. And they ended up in Dallas. They were sponsored by Tobolowsky in Dallas. And Rude Tobolowsky married Etta Tobolowsky, part of the side of the family that was sponsoring them. So that's as much as I know about them. Rube had a brother who lived in Hubbard, Texas, and ran the general store there. And we knew Sam Tobolowsky quite well, because my father, when Sam got ill and passed away, my father ran that store in Hubbard, Texas for many years. And then he also was in the textile business with I think with my grandfather Rube for a while, and then ran Wolf Textile. So
and where was your mother from?
She was, I believe, born in Atlanta and lived in St. Louis, and got her cap, her registered nursing cap, at the Jewish hospital in St. Louis. So I think she always claimed to be from St. Louis, or the South at least. And then just kind of went out on her own. Her mother was an orphan. You'll have to check with my sister Myra, who knows all the history. But and they grew. Jean grew up in. This is my grandmother. I grew up in New York City. I think in an orphanage. Oh. And then married a Pergament, and then they were in St. Louis and came down here. She came down here, I think, on a train, because as a nurse, she got a job down here. This was during wartime. Okay, and so she was a nurse, and did she continue that profession? Yes, she was always she was a public health nurse that would go out. They gave her a car during wartime, went out and gave shots, vaccinations, all during the wartime. And up in the 50s, I think she continued nursing, and even raising 4 kids. She still enjoyed very much working. So she was nursing in different hospitals, on and off. Then back in the 60s, she decided, well, nursing, I think back then you didn't get a BS degree or anything like that, or a BA, so she went back and took the bus every day to North Texas State back then, and got a either English and chemistry degree, some tough degrees, while while I was in high school and college, she was in college finishing up her degrees. Got several degrees up there. So she enjoyed education and nursing. Now after nursing, she became a substitute teacher and would teach in the DISD schools up until when she was in her 80s, I think, as an art teacher, just a substitute. You know, she would wing whatever class they wanted her to teach. So she was very energetic, go-getter. She was always drawing, always an artist her whole life.
What kind of art did she concentrate on?
Mickey Mouse. She loved drawing Mickey Mouse and making cutouts. I would cut out Mickey Mouse silhouettes and she would color them and give them out as presents for 10, 20 years to different people. But it was mostly then, back in college, she was doing some etchings and drawings and paintings, photography. We had a dark room in our house, so when we were growing up, Ira and I, we did photography back in the early 60s, developing our own films and doing that kind of stuff. So we were always busy. They kept us busy, because if not, we would be in trouble. We were either busy or in trouble, or both. So we collected stamps, we collected coins. Our father would buy $50 worth of pennies, and then they would go out to dinner on the weekends, and we sat there and sort through pennies and put them based on dates, and we knew all the important, valuable pennies and quarters and dimes. And so we had big collections of that. We had Israeli stamp collections. We had what were called plate block collections of stamps. So we like collected things, but we always worked. Ira and I always worked throughout growing up. We sold roses, fresh cut tallow roses, for 6 years in front of different grocery stores when we were 12 and 14. So we did a lot of, they kept us busy. Otherwise we'd get in trouble.
What do you recall about spending holidays and special events with your family?
Well, we always had big Thanksgivings. Whether back in 1962, my father, who was also an electrical engineer and worked in Guantanamo Bay putting radar on battleships for World War II. So when the Russians started going into Cuba in '62, he went out and acquired some land north of Dallas so we could build a bomb shelter and get out of the city if we had to get out of the city. So he acquired some property, 55 acres, up near Pilot Point. And so we would up there always working on that, on building fences. I can't remember what the question was now. What was the question?
It was about your holidays, spending holidays.
So we built a
events.
house up there, or renovated a house and added on, and we would have Thanksgivings and Christmas up in the country. We continued that when that property my father owned was acquired by Lake Ray Roberts. I went out and bought some land north of there, about 3 miles north of there. Julie and I built a house on it, and then we had Thanksgivings up there it grew up to about 150 people every Thanksgiving. And we would have, and the kids loved it. They had go-kart racing. All the kids, I mean, anybody who had kids would always come up there. So it was a joint effort between Myra, Ira, and myself. Our families would and then the girls worked too hard. Myra and Julie and Debbie worked, just worked, because we had to feed 150 wealthy people with Thanksgiving, So that's what we did, and we still have holidays, Passovers. We always had big Passovers. This year We'll have Passover in our other room in there for 45 people. And other holidays, it was very interesting. Growing up, my father was in the textile business. So every Sunday, he would invite people over because he had to try out the new linens that he was trying to sell to hotels, motels, and hospitals. So Josephine, my mother, we always called her Josephine and Jack. And so Josephine would cook all this stuff up. We would have a big brunch, and then we would have a food fight because he wanted us to throw food and smear it all over everything, and then my mother would wash it up and we'd see if it works. So we had people come over just to watch us eat on Sundays. So you can ask, there's several of the small families with Neil and Stuart, they would all come over and watch us eat and participate in the food fights. So, but it was organized. So we did a lot of holidays, and we still do a lot of holidays. Yeah.
It's wonderful. Kind of in thinking I'd like to have grown up in your family. What do you feel the impact your family has been on this community, both the general community and the Jewish community?
Well, the family's, I would say, is pretty large. It's enormous. In getting ready for this, my sister brought over the family tree that I had no idea was that big. So when you look at a family tree like that, you expect it to be scattered around the country, but most of these people stayed in Dallas. And we did not really commingle with so many sides, but we knew we were all related. So, and there's so many of us, it didn't make sense to party together. It's just too big of a party. So every so often we would get up with other members of the family and just meet and greet. Paul and Stephen Tobolowsky. Stephen was at SMU with me, acting. He was acting. Paul was in medical school. Ira was in law school, and I was over in the business school. So what impact did we have? Well, a lot of the early, as I say, first generations were all lawyers or doctors, and then the next generation kind of kicked into lawyers and doctors and businessmen and businesswomen. So I think we had a big impact in Dallas in terms of just the amount of professionals we had here. And you have your reputation, your name, and the name has always been a good name. It's not like we've heard bad things said about Tobolowskys or all the components of Tobolowskys. Mm-hmm. So it's been a good name, and as professionals, I think the adults, as they got older, always did community service, always sat on boards, always were involved in Jewish and non-Jewish organizations. I sit on 9 nonprofit boards right now.
Tell us what those are.
I'm on the Meadows Museum of Art board. I'm on the Museum of Biblical Art board in Dallas. I'm treasurer of that. I'm president of the National Center for Jewish Art, which is a new museum here in Dallas. I'm involved with the Abe Zell Foundation, the MB and Edna Foundation. I just cycled off of the Library of Congress board in D.C., and where I was chairman of the MAP division there for 10 or 15 years. Other boards, I just have to think about them. I know I'm on several smaller boards, the Texas Sculpture Association board. I think I've cycled off the Texas Jewish Artists Association board. There's a few more boards, probably some important ones I forget about.
How long have you been doing your sculptures?
Oh, the other board, I'm treasurer of the International Sculpture Society, the International Sculpture Center. That's a collection of about 8,000 sculptures from around the world, and I'm the treasurer of that. I forgot about it because I just had a phone board meeting today. Sculpture. At SMU in 1969, in SMU, I was actually president of the business school at SMU. I was an accounting major, and back then there was not many females in the accounting graduate, in the accounting department. So I went over to the art school to meet some dates, and that was the summer of '69. That whole first part of the summer of '69, Marshall Funk and I spent all summer in Israel working on kibbutzes and digging archaeological digging at Masad and the Wailing Wall. So we came back in '69. We missed the moon landing, we missed Woodstock, and we got back. And SMU just hired this pretty wild-looking artist named James Searles. James Searles is now one of America's greatest sculptors, but he was my teacher and mentor. And James and I have been fast friends for 47 years. Basically, I was his lawyer after I graduated law school at SMU, but I was making art when I was at SMU, undergraduate and law school. And then I was James's attorney or advisor, and when I did about three decades of business, law and business, and then at the encouragement of James in 2004, he said, okay, you can go back into art. And so I started making some pieces, and he said, these are good, and I started getting exhibitions. So I actually graduated SMU with an accounting, sculpting, and law degree. So your normal route.
You're a true Renaissance man.
So in 2004, I went back into art. We had Blockbuster video franchises. I was with a group of really good businessmen. We owned Blockbuster franchise. So in all the businesses I was involved in, I built things. I built the store. Oh, should we throw the dog outside?
Dog are full time
in 2004. We still owned 75 Blockbuster stores. We owned some Palm Beach tan stores. Then a few years later, we signed up to build 100 Dunkin' Donuts stores, of which Dunkin' Donut was not successful in this area. So as we were winding down those, I kept making art, and I kept getting exhibitions and started getting representation by galleries, which was great, and I started selling art, which was always helpful. And I studied back in the early 70s, I had studied with James Searles, who was what you would call a found object sculptor. He mostly went in the woods and picked up wood and put it together into really spiritual pieces. And then I had studied very briefly with Louise Nevelson, who one of America's greatest sculptors. I got to put an exhibition of hers together, physically put a show together for the Dallas Museum of Art. I volunteered because I knew how to run a screw gun. I could unscrew the boxes, I could put her big wall units together, and then I was her escort for it. And then I knew her in New York, because after law school I went up to NYU and was on the LLM program up there in taxation. So I studied with some great artists and learned quite a few important aspects of found object art, and that's what I do. I'm a found object sculptor. I go to scrap yards and junk yards And fortunate enough, we've got some great fabrication plants and scrap yards here in Dallas that were all run by Jewish families over the years. And I always said I was the only Jew to go into a scrap yard in a pickup truck and come out full. So I pick up 2,000 to 4,000 pounds of metal every other week and sort through it and build stuff and collect stuff. I probably have at my studio, which is an hour north of here, probably 100 tons of found objects. And so I enjoy putting things together and building things. And fortunate enough, I get a lot of shows and a lot of exhibitions, and I enjoy what I do.
Do you represent yourself, or do you have an agent?
I have had agents. I deal with agents when they come in. I do not have any gallery representation for the last 7 years or so, because I mostly sell to museums and then to private collectors. I haul 10 to 20,000 pounds of art to an exhibition 4 or 5 times a year. I have 12 exhibitions this year. This is just crazy. But I've got, as a found object sculptor, it's a little different than someone who goes in and casts a big sculpture piece that can take half a year. I make close to, as an average, 40 pieces a year. I give 10 of them away to charitable events and just because people want them and auction them off. And I consider that marketing. Then I get all these exhibitions, because if I sell 10 to 12 pieces a year, I'm doing pretty good. So now I have another 10 to 12 or more pieces that I accumulate and I put in shows. This year I'm moving around 133 sculpture pieces to 12 different exhibitions. I just shipped off 2 major pieces to the Venice Biennale. So I've been in shows in India. I spent 2 weeks in Jerusalem for the Jerusalem Biennale in October. So these are just great events, resume builders, and just nice and you meet people and you get more shows.
How many hours a week do you work on your art?
I leave my house here at 6:45 every morning, at least 5 days a week, to go to my studio, because it's reverse commuting. So then I leave the studio based on the weather, usually around 1:30 or so. Come back, and then I can go directly to a scrapyard or fabrication plant. And then I'm through, I'm through by 4 o'clock in the day. And I do that at least 4 days a week, and if I'm not doing or traveling something, 4 days a week, yeah, and then I work Sundays up there because it's nice and quiet now. But I do all my paperwork, I arrange all my exhibitions. One of my really great things that I build now are menorahs and Hanukkah menorahs, and I've been fortunate enough to install those. My first major museum, I installed a beautiful menorah called the Sea of Galilee menorah at the McNay Museum in San Antonio just last week, because they called me up and they said, look, we were founded by Roman Catholic individuals. We have no Jewish ceremonial art. Would you loan us one? And I loaned them a big menorah. And those loans usually turn into either acquisitions or gifts. So I enjoy making these menorahs, and that's what I schlepped to Israel, was probably only about 2,000 pounds of menorah for the Biennale. But that's the way it goes. Then I started making these flower pieces behind me. Because near my studio is the Texas tulip farm. And this tulip farm, if you've never seen it, you need to go see it. These people from Netherlands came here many years ago and invented tulip farming in Texas. Well, this farm is called sustainable flower farming. This is where you pick to own. you know, kind of like farm to market food. I have studio to market art. So I created a whole series of sustainable flowers, and I call them that because you buy them, you don't have to water them, you don't have to feed them, you don't have to replant them. And so this is what got me into the Venice Biennale, is this sustainable flowers, and the ones I shipped are painted in really beautiful pieces. Each one weighs 515 pounds, so I just shipped those off last week. So you try to be creative. So I still make found object manures, sustainable flowers, and then my other art pieces that weigh anywhere from 10 pounds to about, as an average, 7,000 pounds. So yeah, they can get up there in weight. So that's the art world.
What would you like your personal legacy to be as you think about what you want to leave for your children, grandchildren?
Well, it's the
and
Tobolowsky
beyond?
family. I mean, you know, I didn't even talk about my kids. I've got 4 kids. The oldest 2 are girls, and well, what do you want to do with this dog? Is it
No, let her. Legacy. Yeah, your kids.
My
Tell us about
legacy-
your kids.
My legacy is my family, like the Tobolowskys around town. Married an incredible lady, Julie. I say we raised 4 kids. She raised 5, counting me. And the 2 oldest are daughters, Catherine and Laura. Both went to really good schools and became 3rd grade teachers in the different worlds. One went to Colgate and taught at Trinity in New York City and Greenwich Country Day. And then the other went to Duke. Laura went to Duke and did Teach for America, teaching in an all-black school in Indianola, Mississippi. So they're in different worlds. But I said to them, I said, look, girls, go to law school. And so both of them went back and went to law school. Both of them are lawyers, but they're both married and 2 kids each. So we've got 4 grandchildren. 2 boys, Adam and Robert. Adam is a race car driver, and he works in the auto industry. He's always been a mechanic, breaking down cars and rebuilding them his whole life. So he's a race car driver that if he's not going 180 miles an hour, he's not very happy. But he teaches people how to race cars, how to, you know, these people that buy all these expensive hot rods and hot cars, he'll train them how to drive them successfully. My other son, Robert, lives in LA, and he's founded a company with a college buddy, and he creates music concerts and represents bands and musicians. And he goes around the world doing music concerts. So creative kids, good kids, and then of course Julie is just 8 or 9 years ago, just after being a full-time mom and all of that, she invented the world's smallest cookie with her girlfriend, and she makes the microchip cookies. So she's been on Katie Couric's show along with the Shark Tanks, Bloomberg News, and just last October got picked up by Amazon Prime. And so they're blowing the doors off with Amazon Prime. They got picked up in October, so they could only really provide Amazon enough for the holidays. So we'll see what else happens. I'm going to kill my dog here.
No problem. Well,
Maybe if you put them in your lap.
yeah, I'll put him in my lap. Thank you so much.
Is that enough?
It is, yes, and fabulous, fabulous. I've known Julie since the day she was born. My brother and Donnie were best of friends.
Who's
Milton Loeb.
Oh, I love
Yeah, he passed away
We just-
4.5 years ago.
Right. We